Hey everyone, welcome to my service learning project, Privilege, Intersectionality, and the Webs That Connect Us. I hope you enjoy this strange video with a lot of weird artwork, because that's sort of all I've got for you. When talking about social justice and cultural identity, it often doesn't take very long until someone drops the P word, privilege. Even when it's said with the best intentions, talking about privilege is an almost surefire way to make people feel a lot of uncomfortable things. Here's a fun social experiment for you. Go to a party, start a meaningless conversation with an acquaintance, and jump on the first opportunity you find to call them privileged. Never get invited to a party again. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, I think that part of the reason talking about privilege is so controversial is because it's a topic that is often misunderstood. Privilege can be defined as a set of unearned benefits given to people who fit into a specific social group. Society grants us privilege, or doesn't grant it in many cases, based on various aspects of our identity. Here's an analogy to help us understand privilege further. You and your friend decide to bike to a coffee shop that is equal distance between both of your houses. Your ride is mostly downhill, but it's a little bumpy. It's a really hot day, but the slight breeze at your back helps carry you along somewhat. By the time you make it to the coffee shop, you are slightly sunburned, your legs are starting to cramp up, and you are out of breath. When you meet up with your friend, she tells you that her ride was awful. The route from her house was almost entirely uphill. She had to pedal against the wind since she was coming from the opposite direction, and she got a bad sunburn because she ran out of sunscreen. At one point, she hit a large pothole and fell off her bike, which caused her to hurt her ankle. When you compare experiences, she tells you that your ride sounds a lot easier. She's right, of course. Your ride was definitely easier than hers. But does that mean you didn't bike as hard as you could, or that your ride was a piece of cake? You worked hard too, but you didn't face the same challenges she did coming from the opposite direction. Having privilege doesn't mean that things come easily to you, or even that you didn't work really hard to be where you are. It simply means that life is more difficult for those who don't have the advantages that you do. To be fully understood, we need to talk about privilege within a context of power systems. This is called a privilege web. The inner circle represents power, and the circle around it, privileged identities. White, male, straight, cisgendered, college-educated, middle and upper socioeconomic status, English first language, able-bodied, etc. On the edges, we have oppressed identities, or really anything that's not privileged. People of color, female, LGBTQ, genderqueer, non-college educated, lower class, ESL or non-English speaking, disabled, you get the idea. We can each map ourselves on this web based on our identities. So here's me. Not a lot of oppression going on here, just a little as a woman and a grad student with a significant amount of debt. Yikes. To give you some contrast, here's my friend Sergio, who was a gay Hispanic man. Our web shapes are different because we have different privileges related to our identities. Obviously, the people who exist mostly within the inner realm of the circle have the most power. But what about those who live almost entirely on the edges? What challenges do they face? In 1989, a legal scholar by the name of Kimberly Crenshaw wrote a paper about how Black women were marginalized by both feminist and anti-racist political movements. In both cases, Black women were told their concerns were too unique to fit the needs of the broader movement. Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality to describe how different types of oppression, like being Black and being a woman, could overlap, pushing the feminist movement to include narratives of many women from different backgrounds and racial identities. Today, we use the term intersectionality to describe the interplay of any of the identities at the edges of the web. This acknowledges that all experiences of oppression are not equal. For example, being a woman is hard, but being a trans woman is harder. Being poor is hard, but being poor and disabled is much harder. Being a Black man is hard. Being a gay Black man is harder. Still, there are skeptics of intersectionality. Some argue that focusing on unique struggles like this enforces identity politics, and that it divides us further rather than creating unity. In 1969, feminist activist Betty Friedan once warned that lesbians could derail the women's rights movement by lumping feminists together as man-haters. Friedan referred to the lesbian women as the Lavender Menace, which was threatening the movement, which quickly became a rallying cry for lesbian feminists. A similar schism between unity and identity politics occurred between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. during the Civil Rights Movement. Malcolm X strongly believed that Black Americans needed to focus on supporting other Blacks at all costs, rather than catering the civil rights agenda to a white audience, which he critiqued MLK of doing. Despite their early disagreements, one could still argue that both Malcolm and Martin were drifting toward each other instead of apart. Martin helped direct Malcolm to the merits of nonviolence, and Malcolm helped radicalize Martin and his message towards the end of their lives. Intersectionality is quickly gaining traction in feminist and other social justice circles, but skepticism still remains. As future therapists, we should all be aware of the merits of intersectionality. We should be encouraging the nuanced nature of the individual identity, as well as acknowledging how oppression and power intersect, build upon, and challenge each other. When we're able to acknowledge our own privilege as well as the complicated and overlapping nature of oppression, we open ourselves up to being better allies, better activists, and ultimately, better practitioners. To close, I would like to celebrate the words of Lilla Watson, an Aboriginal elder and activist, about what it means to work together for liberation. If you've come to help me, you are wasting your time. If you have come because your liberation is bound up in mine, then let us work together. Hey, that's it! Thanks for watching my weird video and for putting up with all of my bad drawing skills. These sources were incredibly helpful for me while making this video. I hope you take the time to check them out. Full links can be found in the description below.